See what happens. I don't have a theme song. I don't have an opening monologue.
That's okay.
I just have me.
We'll all sing, and then you can just improvise your monologue. Hey, ladies and gentlemen,
So,
how about those riots, huh?
Oh man, I tell you what, we are live with another Thursday, another episode of the Mattriarchy, and today I am joined by Doug TenNapel, Luke Stone, and Eric. I'm really bad with names.
Hudson.
Hudson.
You got the first part right, so I give you credit for that one.
I was almost like Eric Dinosaur. No, that's not right. That's not right at all.
Eric, I like your voice. For your voice alone, I will.
Really?
I will record anything with you forever.
Okay, because I hate my voice. So
that is the greatest voice I ever heard in my life, man.
I have bowed vocal cords from years of throwing up. So for my medical condition, it wasn't a good time. And I used to have a really beautiful singing voice. Now I can just sing Pearl Jam.
Yeah, you can do Rod Stewart. That's an awesome voice.
Well, I appreciate it. It's the first time I've ever heard that, so that actually makes me feel pretty good.
I love it. I work with like a lot of cartoon voice guys. So Rob Paulson, these guys, they get a little rasp. There's like a natural rasp to them, like Tress Nielsen.
Yeah.
They have like a natural rasp. So you're like all rasp.
Wow. I did some cartooning for early on, like in 2006. We had done a demo reel thinking we'd get out to San Diego and just get in the right spot and earn $1 million selling a cartoon. And I did one of the voices holding my larynx the whole time like this. It was for like this alien king, and it hurt like all get out after we.
Dude, I'll put you in a cartoon with your voice just like that. I swear, I will make $1 million.
Let's do it.
I love it.
I'd love to put your name on a resume too.
I love it. Sure.
Hey, that'd be a thing. So, thanks you guys for coming out today. Thank you guys for coming out. We were expecting a couple of other folks, but I don't think they're going to make it. But that's okay. Or they'll come late or whatever. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen? I only do this much planning for my show, so we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. I brought you guys together Eric asked to be on the show. I asked Doug, and Eric asked for Luke to be there. So, so that's the way this show happened. Guys, let's go ahead and go around and kind of talk about a little bit, because we're talking about Christianity and comics. So let's talk a little bit where we're coming from in regards to the faith, and kind of start with there. And Eric, since you asked, you go first.
Yeah, well, let's see. My name is Eric Hodson, and I guess you could say I've been part of the Baptist tradition for a long time. Independent Baptist, was raised in sort of a cult called Missionary Baptist. Kind of a cult mentality, but it was a podunk rural American church, kind of isolated, very isolationist. And that's where I was saved, and didn't really start to broaden my horizons till my mom wanted to try exploring other faiths, other parts of Christianity, because the way we were raised, the Missionary Baptists were the only ones that knew the truth, and everybody else was going to hell, and nobody could understand why the earth was still spinning and Christ hadn't returned yet, because there wasn't very many of us. And so we kind of broke out of that tradition. My granddad was a Baptist preacher, so we did everything behind his back because it would break his heart to know we were secretly going to some other churches. And I experienced Church of God Holiness. I got involved with a youth group there, started going to DC Talk concerts. Yeah.
Scandalous.
And really faith just kind of grew for me from there till I got into college, and I had nowhere to go, didn't know anything. And I guess you could say it was my most backslidden years, until I had moved to a house in Royal Oak, Michigan, and a lady hung a door knocker on my door for the Baptist church up the road. And I was at a point in my life where my illness was coming on, and I had always known I needed to turn to God. turn back to God, and just, he was always right there with me. I was always getting into the Bible and reading on my own, but I didn't have a home church. I didn't have a family. So I took a risk and I went there and took my wife, who was a Catholic, and she got saved there. We got married there. We were the pastor's first wedding, and we've been there for 17 years this year. So yeah, it's been great. It's a church that preaches systematic theology. We preach through the books of the Bible. So whatever topic that comes up, if it's taboo, preachers preach on it. There's no skipping around. And, it's a fundamentalist culture, but we're not, we don't get into legalism. And my mom was raised, if she touched a beer can, you'd get struck by lightning. And, I got a Stella right here. So.
We love the drinking Baptists.
Hey, you like your whiskey. I've seen it on film.
Oh, hardcore.
Yeah.
I'll be lucky to get through the show without going out to the kitchen and getting the whiskey. I have coffee here to balance it out. That's a great testimony, Eric. That is cool.
Thank you.
What a blessing.
The last part that I would put to it is that with the illness coming on, it's called scleroderma, and it's really it's ravaged my hands. They're all like encased in stone.
Oh, wow.
I have like almost no range of motion. My rest of my joints are that way. And a big part of my testimony is, by God's grace, I draw better now than before this illness happened. And I'll never forget the time when I was really in the pits. I didn't know what was going on with me. I was blacking out, starting to seize up. I was convulsed. I couldn't digest any food. I was getting these sores on my fingertips. It's from Raynaud's phenomenon, but I couldn't afford to go to a doctor. So what did I know? I was just crying out to God, Lord, please, I'm an artist. Don't take my hands. Help me to get through this. And he took my hands, and I'm I'm really well known in the wrestling community for my wrestling art. I got a lot of anime fans for my anime art. I got a nice web comic on Webtoon. And, God's just opened a lot of doors illustration-wise for me. And, every time I'm working, I know it's only because he's allowing me to.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
That's awesome. Luke, you're next.
Yeah. So my name's Luke Stone, and I make comics, but that's not my day job. I am a full-time pastor. I actually sort of was in the church as a kid, and mom and dad wound up getting out of the church. And I remember I got a phone call one Sunday morning. I was just a teenager, and I got a phone call from a guy named Ron Foster. And Ron asked the question. Apparently I knew him somehow from the church that my mom had kind of grown up in and what they were doing. And this guy, he said, "Hey, Luke, what are you doing this morning?" And here's the thing. If someone is associated with the church and is a leader, and they ask you what you're doing on a Sunday morning and you don't want to go to church, say you're busy. But he was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Nothing." He goes, "You want to go to church this morning?" He goes, I'll pick you up. And I was like, well, let me ask mom and dad, so I popped my head in the bedroom. Mom and dad were still snoring. I said, "Hey, Ron Foster wants to know if I could go to church this morning." They're like, oh, Brother Ronnie. Yeah, go right ahead. That's no problem. I said, "Yeah, they said I could go." He goes, "Great. I'm out front. I'll wait for you." He was already there. And so I went to church that morning, and I didn't even know that I needed or wanted anything there. But there was just something about, hearing some of these hymns, and hearing the songs. And in that moment, I realized there was this hole that just needed to be filled. And it was God, the Holy Spirit, things like that. And so that started a journey for me where I started going back to church. And actually my salvation experience, me getting back into church, got my mom and my dad back into church. And so that was God used that opportunity. And so what wound up happening is at kind of an earlier age, like 17, 18, I started taking my faith a little more seriously and started working with a group called Youth for Christ, and was an intern with them. And so I started doing a lot of ministry stuff with that, mostly leading worship and things, because I do come from a music background. Most people in the faith community know me for my music. They don't know me for my comics. And so it's kind of neat to have kind of this duality of personality that people are like, "Oh, I didn't know you could draw," or, "Oh, I didn't know you could sing and play guitar." So it's kind of neat, but And then sometimes there's people like, oh, I didn't know you could preach. I did that as a youth minister for a while. It was so funny because I actually started out as a worship pastor and a youth pastor. And I always wanted to be the youth pastor. I was always passionate about teaching. And so as I would go to these churches and they would hire me because I would do the music, and then they would listen to me preach. When they listened to me preach, they just knew I was taking care of the kids. Well, about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, I was serving here in Jacksonville, Florida. I had moved here to work at a church as the music and youth, and the lead pastor had resigned, and so the option was they're like, well, we had somebody fill the pulpit, and I was like, well, I can fill the pulpit for a little bit until you guys find somebody. And I remember that first Sunday, it was, I get up, I preach, and everything, and we're like, okay, well, we're good to go. And people were like, we didn't know you could preach. I'm like, teaching is my passion. I told you teaching is my passion. Like, oh, well, we just knew you took care of the kids. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not babysitting in there. Like, it's a serious ministry. Kids are, but through that journey, God called me into being a lead pastor. And so for 5 years now, I have been 4 years now. No, 5 years will be in October. I'll be be a lead pastor of a small Church of God congregation, Church of God, Anderson, Indiana. So, the holiness stuff that Eric was talking about. And so that's kind of where I am and kind of where, that's my passion and what I do. So ministry is my first love, my first calling, and comics is just kind of it's really kind of the icing on the cake for me. It's how I make a little extra money. It's how I make ends meet. And it's definitely been used as a testimony over the course of especially the last 3 or 4 months, is, God opens up doors to be able to talk about a book or a piece of art that I'm working on. Then I have an opportunity. Faith keeps coming up repeatedly. And so as long as God opens up those doors and those conversations, I will answer all of those questions with zeal and honesty for anyone who asks them. And so some people will say that's not a good thing to do, but in the comics industry, but I'm a pastor first, and then I'm an artist second. So
kind of grow where you're planted. That's
exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So next we'll deal with who can't showed up to the stream is Doug. So then we'll end with Mark, and he wasn't even here for the instructions. He just gets sandbagged with it. So we'll deal with that.
Okay, I'm a Bible believing Christian. I was first saved at probably 4 or 5 years old. I was led to the Lord by Tammy Faye Baker on TV. She had a call in, so I called in. She walked me through the sinner's prayer. But I was largely raised by my atheistic dad. My mom was Christian Science, but not going to church at all. And my dad was raised Pentecostal, and he had long since abandoned the church. And probably early grade schoolish, middle schoolish, the Nazarene church bus came around and invited me to church and picked up me. And I went, and I just wanted to go to church. And because I always knew there was a God. I just always knew and always I always loved him. And I got saved in the Nazarene church. And then probably by middle school, my mom came, and Dad always swore he would never go back. And now for probably a good 20 years, he's been a Christian too. So it's been neat to see all you guys talking about the people reaching out to you, and, with Luke, like coming out and finding you, and then the whole family is saved. So that's really cool. And then I had kind of I went to Point Loma Nazarene College, graduated in 1988. And shortly after I got married in 90, I had kind of the crisis in faith where I was just like, I'm not going to believe any of this stuff just because people say have faith. I wanted the answers. And I had never heard of Christian apologetics at all. And I started getting into that and just opened my mind to J.P. Moreland, William Lane Craig, Greg Koukl, Oz Guinness, Chuck Colson, all the greats. And then I started going backwards, where I started reading older and going back, where was this stuff at, in man's history? I go back, oh, there's C.S. Lewis. Oh, there's Chesterton. Oh, there's Augustine. Oh, there's St. Thomas Aquinas. You start going back and you find, Oh, they've been there all along. We became illiterate and dumb and stopped reading all their arguments. So now I'm a convinced Christian, the most dangerous kind. I really, my mind is open, but from what I see of how stupid all of the alternates are, I can't be moved. And I'm on board with God and his plan. I realize that I am the worst enemy in my own life, and nobody else has any threat or can scare me with anything. That I'm just concerned with my own salvation and holiness and pursuit, and I want to please God, and I don't give a flying F what people think of me. I've been purchased.
I think that's a not to derail Mark there, but I think it's such an important thing that I think we all should like. It's easy to understand Christianity when you understand that you're the worst.
Yeah. I proclaim my only boast is my sin.
Yeah.
And because it says I am weak, and it says what God has done. And for comics, I've done over 20 graphic novels, written over 8,000 pages of material. Even while we're talking, I am inking this page from Bigfoot Bill. This is the reprint of Bigfoot Bill 1. And but I also came from video games. I made Earthworm Jim, The Neverhood. My video games have gotten awards like Game of the Year. My comics have gotten awards like an Eisner Award. I've worked in television animation, including on VeggieTales, where I got our first Emmy nomination for that show in 20 years. So my work is excellent, and but it is, all of this comic stuff is just my way that I express how I feel about the world God gave me, and kind of human interaction, and it's my tribute to him. So, but my favorite medium of all time is comics. It's something where the least people come to edit me, and they kind of leave me alone, and I can tell whatever story I want. It's probably I think one of the greatest modern art mediums there is. Most potent, especially for believers, is we have a long history of Christians in comics, not always very well publicized, but Jack Chick is probably the highest printed comic artist of all time. And then the Action Bible, the Faith Bible that Sergio did, is probably I think it's the highest selling modern comic of all time. So I'm just saying the idea that we have to beg to have counsel in comics, we own comics, and we always have. We dominate.
Don't say that too loud, or Jeff Lemire will be mad at you.
Sorry,
Mark.
Jeff. This is our house, and you're our guest.
Mark, what's your story, man? Tell us about you and Jesus.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's really cool to be here with some pretty cool cats. At least that's how you guys come across to me anyway, especially Doug. I've had a friend of mine. I told him that I might be talking with Doug TenNapel today. He said to tell you that he played the shit out of Earthworm Jim when he was a kid.
Yeah,
so as did I. It was a hard game though.
My people, those are my people.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, I got your book, so. But
cool. Thank
you.
Yeah.
Hey, no, thank you for a quality product. Well worth the money.
Cool.
Well, for me, I'm kind of complicated. If I'm just going to be honest. I was as a kid raised. How would you say that? I guess Baptist. Even though it was technically a non-denominational church growing up, but it fell under the Baptist umbrella. So as a kid, it was we go to church with my mom. We'd go to church with my mom. Not a lot of male figures around, but then my mom stopped forcing us to go to church when I was probably sometime between the ages of 12 and 13. And I had a best friend, and his mom and my mom, they grew up together. So like our families grew up next door. So our families really, though we weren't blood related, we were family, you know. And his mom had one rule: you can stay over on Saturdays as much as you want, but if you stay over, you're going to church with us on Sunday. So every Saturday, I would stay over my best friend's house, and this is for like 5 years, maybe 6. I'd stay over my best friend's house. We'd play video games, go out, get into mischief, and on Sunday, had to go to church with him and his mom and the rest of his family. So I guess that's what kind of kept me in church. I really liked the communal aspects of church, like being around people and the whole fellowship aspect of it, even though I didn't realize it until I got older, that's what I liked about church. I think I got initially led to God really through a dream I had when I was about 16 years old. And that was kind of like, at the time anyways, that was it for me. And I've had a complicated relationship with Christianity and God in itself ever since. I wouldn't ever say that I'm a non-believer. I think that there's too much out there to suggest that we are here by a series of coincidences. And I am very much a believer in intelligent design. I guess for me, where I have had rocky faith is I've had I don't have a genuine fear of many things. Death petrifies me though. Like I have nightmares probably 2 or 3 times in a month about where I wake up in the middle of the night. I had a nightmare about dying. I'm not ashamed to admit that to anyone. Not knowing, for me anyway, and I understand that with faith, people are at different places at different times in their journey with God. And for me, it's just, I guess, kind of like what Doug was saying, not having that certainty of what happens after that. You know, for me, like the loss of consciousness petrifies me. Like in very real ways. Like I have members of my family, you know, that like they know. But at the same time, I have this a problem with organized religion, and I have issues with the representation of Christianity in itself. Like I don't like to necessarily, like I wouldn't say that I'm not a Christian, but I have a hard time just coming out and carrying the label because I don't think I deserve the label. You know, if that makes any sense. Like I don't feel like I live up to what the expectation is, and I may never. You know what I mean? But that's something that I've always wrestled with since I was really in my early 20s. Is like, well, what does it mean to be a Christian when you say that you claim to be a part of something? You are supposed to be a great representative of that. And if I don't personally feel that I meet my own standards of what it means to represent that, I really wrestle with calling myself one, despite largely that is what I would fall into if you had to put me into a box, if you will. I know that's probably complicated, but
I think in some ways it's complicated, but I mean I think that's a very real place to be at. You know, I wouldn't for a minute try to tell somebody that, you know, that's not a genuine feeling, because I mean, none of us are worthy. We're not. I mean, we can't be. I mean, just think about it, right? I mean, like the mark, and this is one of those things that gets me, and I try to live in this. I'm not sure. I'm not great at it, but because it's super easy to try to compare ourselves to other people, right? To say, oh, I'm better than so and so. No, you're not. No, you're not. You may not partake in their particular brand of depravity, but you are still a broken and dirty person, because the standard is Christ's perfection, right? is that ultimate attitude of holiness that you can't even begin to understand. And the more you understand it, like, you know, I think it's even in Paul's writing, right? Like, you know, at the beginning of he first began writing, you know, he's defending his position as an apostle. And then by the letters he wrote before his death, he's talking about what a trash human he is.
Mhm.
and I mean, Paul didn't get. I can't believe. I have no reason to. I get the idea that Paul got worse as a person. But his understanding of the holiness of God and all of our understanding of the holiness of God, God is so good and so pure, and righteousness is so luminous that us at our best are just
Filthy rags.
we are absolutely no better way to say it.
Yeah, actually, Mark, your
I'll be the
testimony
first to
there,
admit it.
your testimony there reminds me a lot of the position my dad is in. My dad was, I guess, saved in his early 20s, but had a falling out of the faith because I don't know whether or not he just became a Christian to marry my mom, or there was just, kind of this Sunday Christian hypocrisy that he saw, and he just didn't see anything in it. And he went to some very dark places, and he has sins in his life that he doesn't feel like he deserves forgiveness for. And the guilt from that freezes him from taking any future steps, spending any time in the Word. He's sort of kind of created his own version of Christianity. He does pray. I think he tries to read the Bible, but he is in very much the same position as you. He has no trust for the organization of religion. And therefore, he kind of just spins his wheels because he's not growing as a Christian. And this is a danger that we all fall into. We fall into being stuck in our ways in some fashion, and our journey towards holiness, which only ends in our death with perfection after our death. That's the only time that we ever come to that standard, and it's only because of the work of Christ that we come to that standard. Being a Christian is being a filthy, rotten sinner. The only difference between us and our neighbors, we know we need Jesus to get into heaven.
And and there's the one thing that along that road, people talk about, throw around the idea of hypocrisy a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hypocrisy isn't saying this is right and failing to live up to that standard. Hypocrisy is saying, rules for you and not for me. Hypocrisy is saying, oh no, I have attained, while you're absolutely not attaining. It's honesty to say, no, there's a standard beyond me, and I'm horrible at it. I just can't. And that's like Paul in Romans, the idea that our flesh is the dead man tied to us, and we just, no matter how much we want to, we can't get away from it. And our redemption and our goodness is the goodness of Christ. It is His work.
Yeah.
That is.
I would add to that. I would only add to that in the fact that as we are walking in our journey, we use these big, like I call it Christianese, these big fancy holy words that don't mean anything to most people until they're really broken down. When we talk about holiness, we talk about that's a standard that is it seems unachievable in most sense, and it is unachievable by our own fleshly standards. But through the work of the Holy Spirit, we can achieve this thing. But there's this thing we call sanctification, and that word really just means that each day we are being set aside for God's purposes. We're being made better each day than what we were the day before. And I have a pastor friend of mine who I loved how he put it, and I can't put it that way all the time on a Sunday morning, but we could in youth ministry. It's like, God, just help me suck less today than I did yesterday. And really that's the walk of a Christian, isn't it? We're just trying to suck less today than what we did yesterday. Tomorrow we hope that we suck less tomorrow than what we did today. And in that sense, that's really what a Christian is that someone's trying to, that we're in this process of being made holy, of being made better than what we were, being set aside for God's particular purposes and those things. And so during that path, and I like to, I give this example all the time. The hypocrisy comes in there where people don't understand the viewpoint of why we do what we do. Now, there are Christians who will hold unsaved people up to the same standard as saved people. And when we start looking at a lot of the things in Scripture, there's a lot that talks about the unsanctified and the unsaved, and how that process of sanctification works, initial sanctification, that initial part of being saved and giving your heart over to Jesus. But what really we do is we try to apply that continual or that gradual sanctification of being made perfect or being set aside, that sucking less today than we did yesterday. We try to apply that to someone that doesn't believe in God whatsoever. And those parts of the scripture really aren't even intended for them. They're intended only for those that are in relationship with Jesus. And so I like to use this example. Imagine that imagine sin is this big burly guy who is, twice your size, big arms, this big around, and he's got you in a headlock. Now, I used to be in a headlock by that guy, but I figured out how to get out of that. So now I'm not better than you that I'm not in that headlock. I'm better off than you. And that's the thing with sanctification. When you become saved, we still struggle with sin. Christians struggle with sins, different kinds of sins. Some people are, I will not drive anywhere in Jacksonville, Florida with one of my church members in the car. There is no way that's happening, because they do not need to see the things I struggle with in traffic in Duval County. They just do that. So I'm like, so when we're really working at those things, it's like we're all struggling with different things. Now, I may have a certain thing. I may have a certain thing. Like, I had a problem with pornography for a long time, and God delivered me from that. So when I see a guy with pornography, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm not better than you, but I'm better off because I've been able to get out of the headlock. And so I used to bring up our kids, and I would have the big kid in the class, in the youth group, and the little kid come in. I have the big kid put the little kid in the headlock. And I said, look, I'm not better than you. I'm better off than you, but I'm going to tell you how to get out of that headlock. And I would give them a step-by-step instruction on how to, and I would have the big kid like really lock in. And I would give them step-by-step instruction on how to get out of that headlock. And when that little kid busted out of that headlock, both of their faces were just shocked on how it was able to happen. And I said, see, look, now you need to go tell someone else who's in a headlock how to get the heck out of that thing. And that's really what we're doing. That's what the gospel is. It's like, look, I see that you're struggling. I see that you're in bondage and sin. I see that you're unhappy. I see that you are living in fear, and that I see that. And there's a way to not do that. Let me help you realize the real hope, the real faith, Jesus is real. We're sitting in this room virtually, but we've experienced a real Jesus. I've had conversations with people. Well, how do you know it's real? It's like, I could show you I could show you evidence throughout history that Jesus was there. I could do all that, but at the end of the day, I cried out in a room by myself, and I felt the power of a God who pulled me out of things that I should have never been able to be pulled out of. I come from a family full of sinners, of drug dealers, prostitutes, things like that. That's the things that happen in my family, and I'm one of two that God has called into the ministry out of that. And it's people like, how did you turn out to be a pastor? I'm like, I don't know. I ask God that every day. Why me? Because I don't like most people. I'm going to be really honest with you, really transparent. Most people, and I realize, but it's not my table. If it was my table, you wouldn't get to eat at it, but it's not my table. It's his table, and I am just a waiter. So I'm going to give you what he's asked me to give you, and you could send it back to the kitchen, and I'm not going to, but it's like, this is, so when we start to take that look at like, this is what Christianity is, and you really start to be honest with the people that you're doing ministry with or that you're sharing with, that, look, I am a sinner saved by grace. And I know that doesn't make any sense to you, but basically, let me break it down to you. I don't know how I'm going to heaven either. I'll be honest with you. I don't know, except for the fact that God loves me and his blood atoned for me. And
doesn't have to do with my going to heaven. Doesn't have anything to do with me. It's like and that's why, Mark, you should be ultimately encouraged, because you actually have the attitude of the guy who is saved in the Bible. The one who isn't, who Jesus warns us about, is the guy that goes I'm so glad I'm not like that tax collector. That's what he's relying on to be saved. Yeah. When you say, I'm glad I'm not. And this is my warning against hypocrites too, people who complain too much about the hypocrites in the church. We're all hypocritical. So to say, like, I'm not like that guy, I never want to be that guy. That's not, my salvation isn't secured by being not Hitler or not Bill Cosby or not Benny Hinn or not you. My salvation comes from believing in Christ, and that alone is what secures it. So if you believe, you're as in as you're ever going to be. You're as in as you're ever going to be. if you believe. And there's no amount of straightening yourself out that's going to make you more worthy of the what had to be paid for, including, by the way, I believe what has to be paid for is our own doubts still has to be paid for. And he pays for that. Our own absolute failure as Christians, he has to pay for that, because there's no way I'm going to get even my beliefs right. At some point, it has to be his grace burying all and defeating all, or I can frustrate him. I can frustrate. What he did on the cross wasn't big enough for my sin, and I just don't believe that about any sin. What he did on the cross is big enough to demolish that's even my disbelief and even my own failure as a Christian.
Think about think about Calvary. Jesus was hanging on the cross, and he had two criminals next to him, murderer, rapists, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he said to him, "Who do you think? Who do you say I am? You're the Christ. Well, tonight you'll be with me in paradise." And we as Christians, once we make that choice, we could die the next day, and we're paid for. Each day that he gives us in his grace is a blessing. And because of that payment, we should make every effort to become more like him in obedience. That's the struggle. That's where
that's where you lose your fear of death too, Mark, because I'm different than you. I have a death wish. I can't wait to die.
You sound like my cousin, who's a pastor. That's what y'all sound like right now.
Dying is my wet dream.
I'm so sick of living in this body. I can't stand it. It's so broken.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Paul says. He goes, for me to live is Christ. So every breath that I take, I'm gonna do it towards the work of Christ. Right now, we're Doug's working on a comic. I'm penciling some stuff here. Technically it's digital, but I'm still penciling. I'm penciling some stuff over here. We're working on that stuff. But every breath that I do, everything that I do, is for Christ and for his glory, whether it be just my regular vocation or whether it be ministry or whatever it is, it's for Christ. But for me to die, that's for me to gain, so I know where my soul's going to go. I know where my reward is at. And to know that if I depart from this body, which by the way is failing, and I'm going to be made perfect with him, So you do lose that fear of death, and it gives you a boldness. And that's kind of the other thing, like with the whole thing with sin. I've worked with people that they're just so afraid. Well, if I sin, I'm going to go to hell or whatever. And Paul talks about this freedom in sin, freedom from sin. He goes, "Why are we made free in sin? So that we can continue to sin, so that grace can abound?" He goes, "Certainly not." Of course, the language he would have used in his day was a little harder than certainly not. It was more like a hell no. He goes, "No, that's not what we're doing."
A little light. That's
yeah, certainly not. It's a little light. He was like, "Oh, no, that's not what we're doing."
I mean, I like to keep the show about a PG-13, but
you're allowed 2 F-bombs. No, I'm kidding. 1 F-bomb.
1 F-bomb. Okay, but he says certainly not. We're not going to do that. He goes, "We're given this freedom so that we don't have to worry about our eternal soul, so that we can have this security and knowing where we're going to go, so that we can help bring others to the same realization, to the same relationship with Jesus Christ." And so there becomes a real boldness when you no longer fear death, you no longer fear where you're going to go, when you know that it's not a matter of my works, but it's a matter of his grace and his goodness and his work on the cross, and that everything that I have is his anyway, whether it be success or failure, that none of those things rob my joy. There's such a freedom in that, and there's a boldness in it. And I think,
and maybe I can get you guys to chime in too. I do fear suffering. Like I don't fear death. It's not the leaving of the body that scares me or losing consciousness. It's the suffering. Like, I don't like pain. I have a low pain tolerance. I'm a pussy. I don't want to be tortured. I don't want to be skinned alive in some guy's basement. I don't want to have to go through, chemotherapy if I die of cancer. I want to get hit by a truck or die of a heart attack, something quick. So maybe the fear of death that you have might just be not so much a fear of the end, but the fear of, we're modern weak Americans and we haven't experienced a lot of pain. That's what bugs me more. Is I don't want to go through pain, Mark.
I've had pain. I don't think anyone who's served in the y'all don't know this about me. I was in the Army for 9 years. In the reserves. I was a chaplain assistant actually, when I was in the Army, and I had every intention on. I joined the Army when I was 17, and I had every
Thank you
intention
for your
on going
service.
to theology.
Yes, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I joined when I was 17, and I had every intention on going to like theology school when I was done, and I'm not quite sure. I can't put a finger on any one particular thing. It was a combination of things where I just became very cynical, and a lot of this is where my personal issues with the organization of religion came into play. I have a lot of problems with that as a whole, but and my fear of death is largely out of like I mentioned earlier, fear of losing consciousness. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
But I want to find out more about you don't have an obligation to believe in organized religion to be saved, but you said that you doubted your own.
No, I don't.
Well, I will tell you this. I also don't like organized religion. In fact, I left the church for a while. In fact, my statement was, well, if those people are going to heaven, I'd rather burn in hell. Because I didn't want anything to do with those. And God actually got a hold of me and shook me really hard. And he said, why are you being so hard on my church? He goes, they're just imperfect people and they're trying to be better. And I said, well, they don't try really hard. He goes, well, why don't you show them a better way? And that's why I'm a pastor. I am a pastor, not because I love organized religion. It's because I hate organized religion. I hate it with a passion. I can't stand committees. I can't stand the politics of it. I can't stand people like arguing over preference when, it's like, what does the carpet have to do with souls being saved? Not a thing. Yeah. But I'm there I'm in it because I want to see it change and I want to help it change. And, and it's funny when you were talking about suffering. Paul actually brings that to the forefront in Romans chapter 5, where he says, we rejoice. He goes, through him, we have also obtained access to faith into the grace, which we stand, and we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. And I'll be honest with you, I used to be the not want to suffer, but in 2008, man, I'll tell you what, I went through some extreme suffering. But I see what God produced in my heart and my character, and I won't go back and change those things. Yeah, I would never go back and change those things. But I think God some people do love organized religion.
He gave me. I got skin cancer here. This is a giant rip. I've got in my face, and by giving me 20 years of needles, I don't fear needles anymore. I laugh now when they put them in my face. So he's making me a little more able to stomach suffering. So maybe he's still like needles. Maybe I'm in training.
So, well, and I think that's there's lots of kinds of suffering, but back to the subject of organized religion too. I think that it's actually really healthy to be skeptical of organized religion.
Yeah,
because if you look at the biblical narrative, right, God sets up an organized religion. He says this is how Judaism is supposed to work, and within a matter of generations, they're already using it as a power play, right? Yeah. Because people are really broken. And I think, of course, I believe wholeheartedly that the purpose of the Old Testament law was to demonstrate how crappy we are and how unattainable holiness is by us, by human effort. And so I think that it's reasonable to be skeptical, because it's not the religion that's the problem. It's the organization. It's the people that are in it. And so, I think the Reformation is a great, not everything that happened in the Reformation was great, but it's one of those things that I think that it demonstrates that, we need to be skeptical. And I think the Bible actually calls us to be skeptical. God says, let us reason together. Come, let us reason together. And we're challenged.
No church is 100% assholes. That's some of my biggest heroes in the church. So I hate X or Y guy over there, or that person. Well, that song again. But then there's also like, ooh, that guy. I love giving him that old man a hug, and that family over there I really dig. And there's really neat, wonderful people in that corrupt, horrifying institution.
Absolutely. For me, it was like the thing, I guess, that I started to realize. And I started realizing this when I was around 17, 18 years old, that And again, it was a Baptist church that I was going to. So I don't know how many of you have gone to a Baptist church, but it was a very much. I felt like the pageantry of it all was more important than the community aspect of it. You know, I tell people all the time, the best church I ever went to, I love that church, man. That church really brought me. It's really what kind of brought me back in to my faith and everything. And that church was what, maybe 20 people?
Yeah, I love those too.
Maybe 20 people.
That's the kind of church I pastor.
Yeah, and I loved it, and it was very much, you know, the bulk of the work and financial burden was on a handful of people, and we couldn't really sustain it, you know, and it really hurt me when that church had to go, because it felt like everything I wanted at a church when I was younger, I was finally getting. You know, the interpersonal relationships, and the fellowship aspect was. It wasn't. You weren't just another person in a room with almost 200 people. You know what I'm saying? So like it was a lot more personal. So you got to know the pastor better. You got to know the kids, their kids better, and the other members. You had these very real relationships, you know what I mean? There's very strong bonds that were developed, and we really encouraged each other, and we pushed each other in good ways, you know what I mean, to be better men, particularly with the men there, you know. And it was just to be open and honest. There wasn't any judgment about when we talk about things we were struggling with, you know, and our sins that we wrestled with. There was no, oh, well, how dare you? No shame on you. None of that stuff. It was all truly intended, and I believe for the way God would want people to help each other with when you're talking about those kind of things. Mm-hmm. It wasn't hey, it's okay, no big deal, but it also wasn't hey, cool, that's awesome. You know, like we would steer each other as best we could, you know, to be as holy as we could, you know what I mean? To be as sinless as we could, which is impossible, but we tried. Like the relationships were real.
Well, that's what a church
about
is,
20
man.
people, the whole church.
That's what if a church isn't doing that, then it's not really a church. And that's the problem. We have a lot of churches that aren't really churches.
We tend to.
I agree.
We tend to kind of be in this time of apostasy, because a lot of mainstream organizations within the tent of Christianity seem to really be falling away. And I would almost hazard a guess the Baptist church you were in was a Southern Baptist, because they're really going that route where it's more of this money-making mega machine. They answer to a convention outside of them. Yeah, it's a business. And you get, and that starts to get into these wacko faith healers and all this nonsense, and the mega churches and the Joel Osteens of the world, and it becomes
Creflo Dollars.
Creflo Dollar. Yeah. If the church is about the pastor, it's not a church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's 100% true, and I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of times in the Western church, Matt, my pal Matt Crotts was in the chat ribbing me about organized religion just a bit ago. But I think one of the things that I think we have in the Western church is we've fallen into this trap of cult of personality, where the pastor is an identity, where he's a character instead of simply being a representation. And that's one thing that in the Eastern and Catholic Church somewhat, because the priests are only representatives of something else. That in the office they're not supposed to represent themselves. In the office they're supposed to represent Christ. And while I don't necessarily agree with that model, because I think Christ should represent Christ, at the same time, the idea that Christ is our focal point is something we can forget in our lecture-based Western churches.
Yeah. And I do love the lecture. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying I love it. Guilty. We have 3 pastors at our church, and 2 are great speakers and 1 is not. And the one that doesn't, when he gets up there, I'm like, oh man, he's still preaching from the Bible, but I'm bored as hell. And then the other two, like they're total like motivational speakers. So it's like they're preaching from the Bible, and it just sounds 100% more true coming from.
In my journey, I went from only hellfire and brimstone, spitting at the mouth, face beat red about the fiery pits of hell, to a very well-educated seminary pastors. And it's like genealogies. I'm falling asleep. And then like recently, like the one time where we were doing a study in Ephesians, and he got really animated. I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm paying attention. This is getting good. It just kind of shocked me out.
Yeah, and I'm actually I'm a big fan of the systematic verse by verse, chapter by chapter format, because I think that it wasn't an accident when they put the canon together, because it ties together really well if you're paying attention to it that way. And I didn't grow up in that kind of a church, but as an adult, it's something that I've really appreciate. And I never got to talk about me. I grew up in a.
How dare you?
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'll be quick since I'm not that important.
Short version.
A Baptist, not Baptist church. The independent Bible churches in Oklahoma that are absolutely Baptist but refuse to acknowledge that. Because it's a point of pride that they're not Baptists, but they have exactly the same doctrine.
Our church is not Baptist, but it's identical to being a Baptist.
It's identical to being Baptist. And that's mostly what I grew up in. I can't really say that I ever had like a major backsliding moment where I doubted the faith. It just seemed too obvious. I came to faith as a 5-year-old, just knowing that there's more to the life than this one. I knew it. And nothing has convinced me otherwise. The world's too perfectly put together, and we're too rotten to make sense of any other worldview. And then when you look at the historical basis of the Bible and the prophetic aspects, and the fact that Job describes the water table 3,000 years ago, there's no way that that the divine creator, the timeless one, didn't reach down and give us that knowledge. So yeah, that's it. I am a former youth pastor, and currently I'm working in the private sector doing mental health work. So that's my story.
So it's the same job.
It's kind of the same job. I don't get to point to the text as often. I need to be a little more oblique about it usually. So although I have had times where I work with young people, teens and young adults, and there have been times where they've been just like, you believe in that God thing, right? Yes. Do you want to hear about it?
I understand it's not as popular with the kids these days.
Well, sometimes I gotta ask.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, for some people, just knowing like that somebody believes something that crazy, they're just like, how can you believe something so crazy? Oh, okay. You seem like a really smart guy. Well, here are my reasons.
Yeah, I don't have the faith to be an atheist.
I don't have the faith to be an atheist.
I was going to say, I think it's more crazy to believe that we're here by a series of coincidences, that we're just far enough away from the sun to where our ecosystem works, and that all the science that goes into our solar system, we're just at the perfect distance. And we have like less than like 1 trillion% of a chance that we'd even exist. I can't go with that. That to me is more ridiculous than believing that our galaxy and everything was created by an intelligent being.
Yeah, the fine-tuning argument.
I can't get behind that.
The biggest thing for me, like the scientific aspects are a huge part of realization for me. The unquestioning historical accuracy of the Bible. Everything that we can prove has been proven correct, and nothing that can be proven has been proven wrong. About the Bible, that's a big factor.
I think there's more evidence to prove that right than there is to disprove it.
Oh,
That's how I personally feel about it. So I know
like,
some people disagree, but
like there is more historical evidence that Jesus Christ lived and died than that Julius Caesar ever existed.
You know, but sadly, here's the problem. There's so many Christians that abandon logic and reason when Jesus used logic and reason to talk about, faith and having faith in him. But what we run into is there's so many people that like want to use logic and reason and science, but Christians that just say like, oh, well, you just got to have faith. And they just abandon the actual study and understanding of logic, reason, and science that is so convincing to the faith that if you spend some time to learn it, you could convince anyone.
I love Answers in Genesis. Ken Ham, his work at the Ark and the Creation Museum. I'm a follower of Professor Charles G. Jackson. He is a great apologist. He's a member of Mensa. He's got like 4 PhDs. This guy, if you're ever like struggling with some sort of evolution BS that that you just can't quite wrap your head around, go listen to this guy and some of his lectures on Facebook. And that guy, he knows the science forwards, backwards, left and right, and there's nobody who could out debate him.
Yeah.
And what's his name?
Charles G. Jackson.
Okay. Is he? There's someone that's coming to mind. I'm sorry, Rhys. I didn't mean to cut you off like that. There's someone that comes to mind that sort of fits what you're saying, where they're like well respected within the science community. This was an Asian guy, and I can't think of his name, but that's who I don't know if it's the same person you're talking about.
It's not the same guy. Jackson often gets compared to the guy from Jurassic Park.
Sam Neill's character there?
No, the chaotician. Malcolm, yeah.
Oh, Malcolm. Okay.
Yeah. He looks just like him.
He's like Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he's very Jeff Goldblum.
That's, okay.
Very much like Goldblum. Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy like Goldblum.
That's the best way to be an apologist, is just be a little Goldblum creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know if the guy, I'm not familiar with him, so I can't really say that. The other thing that to me is just mind-boggling, other than just the science stuff, is the philosophy stuff, like the idea that truth can exist, right? That knowledge can exist. I was listening one time. Doug was talking. Doug and Mike were talking to the SWC guys, and they had him ask the question. I mean, why should anything exist rather than nothing? And I think that's the perfect way to explain one of those things that to me is most telling about the idea that we live in a created universe overseen by an omnipotent deity, is that anything should exist. Because
my discussions with SWC and on logic, I as you know, I wade pretty deep in with the non-believers, SWC and Nurkish and all those guys. I'm always fascinated by non-belief. And I'm always trying to find out what makes that tick. And it's because, deep down inside me is an atheist trying to get out. But I never have a reason to let him out, because I'm just I'm looking for any one single argument that could shake my faith, like something rational and reasonable. And it always amazes me how thin the atheistic arguments come up. And among them are those things like, if I met an atheist that just said, yeah, it's okay if you eat someone else, I'd go like, okay, that's a good one. Now you're at least consistent. I never met that guy. It's always the atheist that has his hands on his fists on his hips, shaking his finger, judging everyone. I'm going, on what ground do you judge? Like, give me the and all they can talk about is like a survival benefit. I go, really? That's why we're against rape? Because of a survival benefit? I'm going, if anything, I can give you a better argument for rape.
My cousin always said that.
Yeah, so I'm just going.
More faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian.
I'm looking for. There's this little atheist in me. I'm far darker than them. I can go farther down that road than they can. And that's been something that just ends up securing my faith.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Andrew Clavin talks about that as well, with the idea that one of the things that turned him to the idea away from atheism was the idea that, that he came to realize that that from reading Marquis de Sade that some things are just wrong, and if anything is just wrong, that means that there are absolutes. And that was a foundation to rethinking his entire worldview.
You have to have a worldview that allows for absolutes, and makes.
We all do. We all do, whether we want to admit it or not. And that's one of the things that I find so fascinating about that. So, well, we are at an hour, and we have not really talked comics at all. Oh, Mark, in the chat is in the private chat. There's a link that Eric sent over.
Yeah, yeah.
You saw it already. Well, good.
I did. Yeah. Thank you very much. I gave him a thumbs up and like a nod. I think you've seen it. So
okay, well, I didn't know.
Thank you very much.
Here, I thought you were plotting my excellent point.
It was an excellent point.
Don't say that. I'll get a big head. So, but yeah. Also in our regular chat, what if these guys know the Bible Project? I believe is that the YouTube channel that does
that's where they break down individual books. Stuff? Yeah,
and like real 5-minute breakdowns of the epistles and stuff. That is good stuff. I have not watched all of them, but it is good stuff.
We did a Sunday school series on them, and it was really good.
Yeah.
I funded them back in the day. One of the first, they did a little money raise, and my wife and I were in on that. And then to see how it's grown is just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're
phenomenal.
Product. I have not caught up on them like I feel like I should, so I feel guilty about that. But
well, for those of you guys in the audience, if you have no Bible background and you want some well-reasoned, real simple teaching on any book of the Bible or any scripture you're about to read, go to the Bible Project and just watch the videos on whatever book you're about to read. They're a great guide through the scriptures, and there's always little animations along with it. Very, very high quality stuff, and the reasoning is very sound. In their teaching is rock solid.
And
Bible
sometimes they don't do like just books too. They do like individual Bible stories that stand on the sort of kind of on their own.
Yeah.
And they'll do concepts like what is atonement and what is redemption and why those things matter. So they have some of those too.
I always like to tell people like new to the faith, just go, let's go there. Let's go through those things. And then we can talk about each one that we watch. I love like when they break down like the original like Greek and Hebrew of the words. Cause I've gone to seminary, so I like theology. I'm a theology nerd. One of my favorite things to read is this thing. It's called it's basically a seminary in a book. It's a book about yay thick, and I just love to read it. I'm like, this is good stuff. And I eat it up. And I'm so as geeky as I am about comics, man, I'm real geeky about theology, and I could talk for hours about theology and break it down, that kind of stuff. But most people aren't there. And I'm like, start over here, watch that, and then we can talk about it. Like help, because they can explain it and in kind of this way that just it's really digestible, and it's really, really nice.
I gotta say, this hour has gone by really fast because this has just been enjoyable and edifying and encouraging.
Yeah, what are we doing on YouTube?
Yeah. Well, I think we're on YouTube just because it's the place that we can do it. Because I mean, I'm not close to any of you geographically.
Yeah. I don't know. I know I'm not close to you geographically. I'm not sure where Eric, Luke, or Doug are at. I'm an East Coaster though.
I'm in Detroit.
I'm in Franklin, Tennessee.
I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Massachusetts.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now,
this is kind of cool,
Now all the people that hate us can find where we live and torment us
and dox us.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, good luck.
I dox myself.
There's not much there.
Everyone's talking about doxing. I dox myself. I mean, it's like, like people know where I live.
Yeah,
I use my real name on Twitter, so
I do too.
I'm a nobody on Twitter, so like it's not like whatever, bro.
When I started this little channel, and I knew occasionally I'd get into hot topics, and I just decided, I'm from Scotts Bluff, and if they want to bother to come out to the absolute middle of nowhere to find me, well, then that's their gas money. Maybe I'll buy them coffee.
Yeah, no doubt. When I started doing things in the wrestling business, I had to develop myself as a persona, and I just been using my own name, and my name as an artist. It's I never thought to do anything other than just my own name. So I've been public now for gosh, a decade or more. So, I mean, and bring it on, because, you know, I love doing conventions. Well, I did love doing conventions. And it's just a great way to be completely honest about yourself. You know, I wear my story on my sleeve, and it opens doors for people, because most people, when you interact with them, strangers, they have their walls up. Once you can connect with them and those walls start to come down, that brings opportunities for the gospel.
Mhm.
And,
Absolutely.
you know, and a comic book convention, my gosh, that's a hell of a mission field.
So talking
Yeah,
about
and yeah.
comics, are any of you guys doing conventions?
It was.
Yeah, I've got a couple coming up. Yeah, we're actually doing Tampa Bay down here, and so we're going to do that one in. We're doing that one in July, and then I've got a one-day toy and comic expo in August, and then I'm doing another thing in October. One in September, one in October, that are still on. So I do have a few coming in this year.
Do you think there could be more heat on those Florida conventions because San Diego got canned?
It could, but I'd try
Could there
not
be
to concern myself with that.
more interest? I mean,
Oh yeah. I guarantee there's gonna be more interest. But you know, I'm kind of with Eric. It's also a mission field for me. So if I'm there, you know, I'm sharing my faith. Like it seems like God always opens up the opportunity for me to share my faith. At my last convention, both of my you know, what I call my booth mates, you know, the people, the booth here, the booth there, at some point started like, oh, so you're a pastor too? I'm like, yeah, you know, so we kind of talk about those things, and we just have conversation, and they're like, hey, I've got a question. I got a question. So my wife now has to sell my comic book while I am now answering, you know, I'm like doing pastoral care. And I realized that, you know, there's that need for that there. And so, yeah, so I like to do those things because of that.
I met my best friend at a convention. They did a Christian in comics thing in early 2000s, and Ethan Nicole went to see this Christian talk. And he came up to me afterwards, and he and I have been best friends ever since. Now he does the Babylon Bee and did Axe Cop and Bearmageddon and all this stuff. One of my best friends. Now we do Audio Mullet together too, our podcast with Mike Nelson.
Talking about Audio Mullet before we went live.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the Audio Mullet podcast. I actually met Ethan via phone many years ago. I was, for just a short period of time, I was a creative director for a t-shirt company. And we had licensed X-Cop. And so I was talking to him over the phone, getting the artwork in, and disseminating that down to do some T-shirts and stuff.
How cool is that?
Yeah, that was short-lived, but it introduced me to his webcomic, and I loved it. And then re-finding him on Twitter and Audio Mullet and the Babylon Bee stuff, I've sent some things like, hey, this would be a good headline. This would be a good headline.
Oh,
I
yeah.
absolutely
They
just
love those.
how hilarious it is.
They love those.
They've got to do one. They've got to do one about Michigan and Indiana, because Indiana put up this billboard that says, hey, welcome, bring your revenue. And we're still in lockdown here. So there needs to be like a Michigan response to Indiana billboard, puts up razor wire and security guards.
Speaking of t-shirts, I want to get into the t-shirt business on my Shopify store. I want to do some Doug TenNapel t-shirts, some designs and stuff. It seems like that a weird part of that business I didn't understand is I thought I'd go to one company and they have the shirts there and they do the printing. And I go to all these companies and it seems like they're all printers, and they say, are you going to bring in your wholesale shirts? You're going to buy them from what vendor? And I go, I thought I bought them from you. Is that weird?
That is kind of weird, because like the place that I worked at, and you could look them up, they're still in business. It's Trevco, Trevco.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to give him business because the owner was kind of a jerk to me when he let me go. He just wanted to hire somebody else.
Oh, that's okay. I work only with jerks.
But yeah, they have a really slick operation. They carry all of the product there. They do all of the graphic design and the printing there. It's a water-based process that cures. They bundle, box, and ship all in the same area.
What's their approximate per unit price if I wanted as a vendor, a low price, high quality shirt?
When I was there, I want to say that it was about $7 a shirt with a minimum order of 12 of any one size.
Okay.
And that's the kind of stuff they would offer that for people who are like doing family barbecues and reunions and stuff like that. But they're also a licensor. They do, well, that's how I met with Ethan Nicole, is through the licensing place that was handling his branding for Axe Cop. So, and they compete with what is it? There's like a few other ones that are like American Bad Food or something like. There's like three or four different big ones.
I'll hit you up on Twitter or hit me up on Twitter.
Yeah.
Hit each other up on Twitter so I can get those competitors' names too. I'd like to ask around, and
Yeah, I gotta tweak my memory because that's been several years.
hopefully
now,
I can work with a non-jerk company.
But yeah, you definitely want to go with a place that does everything there, because everything. If people are asking you to bring in your shirts, that's chintzy.
Yeah.
That does sound weird. We might be having a con in Fort Collins, Colorado in August. I haven't heard if it's been canceled or not. It was on hold, so I got to look into that. But I know here in Scotts Bluff, we co-host a mini con with our local mall. It's free for everybody. Vendors, booth, tables, participants, everything. And because they give us free space, and so we don't have to charge anyone anything. And
That's
if we run out of tables, people just bring their own. So
I'll be at the Denver Comic Con. It's rescheduled date.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. I won't be
Getting in there. I don't know about over.
Getting into Denver is hard.
I don't know about over here.
You have to, like before it was hard because space was limited, and they started curating the show. So if you don't have a name, it's super hard to get in.
Yeah, I didn't get in last year. I was waitlisted. This year I got in the first time. I've done it about five consecutive years in a row. It's a great show.
Yeah. Everyone who I know who gets there says so.
Yeah, I love that show. I'll be in Salt Lake. Love Salt Lake FanX, Salt Lake Comic Con, whatever it calls itself now. Hopefully I'll be able to get down into Florida. I'm on the wait list with Lexi for Tampa Bay. And then just like a whole bunch like Planet Comic Con in Kansas City. They've all had to reschedule, and they're all piling up on the same days.
Oh, yeah. I'll bet.
It's like September to November is just like crammed.
Yeah.
Well,
our date
was having to push everything back.
Our date was October anyway. We try to catch the tail end of the summer season by
missing
entirely going into winter, and so our date didn't change because of all that stuff. So unless something terrible happens.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I don't even know if New York's
Boston
going on
Comic
still,
Con
because
well, some of those big shows that they ended up up here, Cheyenne Frontier Days. We just found out that they're canceling that entirely, which is a huge like rodeo fest if you don't know. And it usually lasts like a whole week, and they've got all sorts of A-list concerts and all kinds of stuff. And Cheyenne gets like 3 times larger, so there's like 1.5 million people there. But this year they're canceled because not just because of the virus, but because it's late enough in the year that they're open. Cheyenne's open up and planning to be opened again, but there's no time for planning and getting sponsors together and all that other ancillary stuff that makes the festival happen. So that's part of the deal with that. But
yeah, one of my favorite shows. It's actually close to Doug, the Lexington Comic and Toy Show. Love that show, and they moved, and then they had to cancel that, so they're just next March. But that one has always been one of my favorite shows.
Cool.
I'm just looking here. The Boston Comic Con is supposed to be from August 7th to the 9th, but I think they're going to have to cancel that because I know the mayor in Boston is shutting everything down till like September. Like we can't have large gatherings, but I'm looking on their website right now, and there's nothing saying it's canceled.
Well, with conventions, and this happened with WrestleCon, they have to wait till the state tells them definitively yes in order for them to be able to get out of their contracts. WrestleCon, which was supposed to be in Tampa Bay, had to argue with the hotels to and actually go into litigation to get their deposit back on the hotels. The hotel was trying to keep them from closing, and they had to have that proof of the state being the one that shut it down. So it doesn't surprise me that cons are going to wait till the last minute because they're waiting on that to happen. Otherwise, they will lose a ton of money.
And of course,
it's the same thing with I was going to say SummerSlam was supposed to be in Boston this year, and that's still kind of up in the air because, like I said, the mayor has already said that they will not allow large gatherings till I believe sometime in September. But they haven't officially canceled SummerSlam for Boston yet. And I don't know if it's a similar. I'm pretty sure it's a similar situation. I know with WrestleMania, they had to wait, and I think they might even be getting sued over. No, there was going to be, but then they got out of that. But to my understanding, anyways, I know they ended up doing WrestleMania at the Performance Center in Orlando, which was awkward.
Wrestling has been weird to watch because there's no audience.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
It's like the early
Big
days,
wrestling fan, by the way.
It's like the early days when there was no one there. There was no one there before because I wasn't really popular, but now there's no one there because they can't be. But it still reminds me of the early days.
It's really awkward watching wrestling right now. I don't know how many of y'all are actual avid wrestling fans, but I probably watch about 8 hours worth of wrestling a week. So it's really awkward to watch wrestling right now.
I put a link in the chat to my wrestling artwork, so you can check that out.
Oh,
I've seen some of your stuff before. I've seen you on Twitter. Actually,
I'm all over the place.
Yeah. I've definitely seen you on Twitter before. How did you get into the wrestling stuff?
I've always
Were you just a wrestling fan?
I've always enjoyed it, and I wanted to find when I was originally started out doing independent publishing. I had my own crappy little black and white comic in 2005 that didn't go anywhere. Then I started. I got my master's in art education, and I started doing some teaching. My disease got to the point where I realized I was a liability to the students, so I couldn't teach anymore. So I went back to art and comics. And I'm like, you know what? I got friends. They're hanging up. They're selling prints and stuff. Maybe I'll just try to improve my art and do the comic book conventions, build a following, and get back into comics, which is really kind of what I've been trying to do. And Bret Hart was in town for a show, and I wanted to do something cool for the Comic-Con. So I took Spider-Man 129 and blended it with Bret Hart as the Hitman instead of the Punisher. It was a huge hit, and suddenly I had people coming at me from all sides. Oh, man, you should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And it just became this thing that became wildfire. And now I work for, I've done all the official artwork for StarCast conventions. And I've done official
StarCast, yeah.
Done official work for Mick Foley twice for 2 of his comedy tours. And then I work for High Spots. I'm doing a series of autographed ones that they're having all the talent sign, working on those. And it's one of the ways that God has really blessed me in an area where there needs to be more Christians. So
yeah, you've got great anime work up too.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. My art style, I've never felt like I had one. I always kind of felt like, oh, hey, I like how that guy draws. I'm going to try drawing like that. Oh, I like how that guy draws. I want to try doing like that. So I've kind of always muddied my own waters. I actually admire people who draw in a single style consistently, because I'll get bored and want to try something and change something up.
That's pretty interesting. I know you had mentioned it earlier, but what you said, you have a disease. What does it do?
It's called scleroderma.
You don't want to talk about it. That's cool.
No, I love talking about it. I do occasionally. I'll do like medical symposiums that the Scleroderma Foundation puts together to tell doctors who are in training about the disease. They do this with all types of disease. There's like one big giant disease day at the Henry Ford Hospital every year, and we meet new doctors coming in and give presentations. So I love doing that. And one of my icebreakers is we're talking about scleroderma and how it's affected my hands. I was trying to learn sign language, but now all I can say is
You sound like
and half the room will laugh, and half the room like, I don't think I can laugh.
Oh, Eric, I know your icon now. I've seen you in my chat for like 2 years.
Yep.
Now I put a face to it. I get it now.
But so it's called scleroderma, which in Latin means hard skin. The chief characteristic is the collagen buildup in the joints, and your body just kind of is entombed in its own shell. I'm 42 and I have almost no wrinkles because my skin is really stretched on my face. And my wife loves to give me haze about it because she's starting to get lines.
Yeah.
It's like, you just
And
got
people usually get collagen implants, and you've got collagen natural.
yeah, it's a natural buildup.
Yeah.
And and there's internal things like I couldn't digest because I have esophageal dysfunction, and that caused me to vomit everything I would eat for the longest time, and that gave me Barrett's esophagus, bowed vocal cords. There's Raynaud's phenomenon.
That's why you sound a little raspy.
Yeah, that's why I got that rock and roller voice that
Okay.
Doug seems to like.
I
Okay.
love it.
And then I would I get these sores on my fingers from Raynaud's, where and Raynaud's is an associative illness that kind of comes with other autoimmune diseases. And your body, when it gets a chill, thinks it's going into hypothermia. So it starts to draw the blood flow from your extremities, and your skin tissue just starts to die. And you get these gangrenous sores that I got to lance and drain and all that. And so my hands are all really calloused and chopped up. It was an agony too, because I was a graphic designer at the time, and I'd have all these janky bandages around all my fingers, and I was like, which two fingers can I type this copy out with?
Wow.
Wow. And you work around that, obviously. You found a way to work around that.
And necessity is the mother of all invention, and the good Lord has found a way for me to thrive with it as a testimony to his grace.
Cool.
Yeah, man, that's awesome.
that is very,
Lovely.
very powerful testimony, man, for real.
I
And you still work within everything. That's inspirational, if anything.
yeah.
I would become a worse sinner if I wasn't trying to work so hard. You know, all of that idle time. No, thanks.
Yeah, men got to keep busy. Man with spare time ain't a good thing.
I think that's a
not
fair
at all.
statement.
That's a fact.
So-
That is a fact.
So let's I started earlier and we got all distracted about, but four of us make comics, and Mark reads them.
Yep.
Does not make you less of a person, but this question does not necessarily apply to you here, Mark.
It's okay. It's okay.
But one of the things is that and also Eric from the chat, Ichthus
Hey, look at that.
says,
Yeah, correct
Hey, that's-
book.
that's a good book.
Yeah.
Also, Eric from the chat
Damn good book.
says you're a walking inspiration.
Mhm.
I thank you very much for that, and I will let you down. So don't be inspired when I fall. Be inspired when I get back up.
Yeah.
Love the humility.
But how do we? But for those of us who make comics, how do you guys see your faith impacting your work? I mean, I know Luke, you already talked about like cons being a mission field, and comics being an avenue to talk to people about Jesus, and I think that's good. But the actual work itself, do you feel like how do you feel that impacts it?
I see it a lot. It's part of job, so I'm just a bricklayer on one hand, but part of our job is also to make content. So we have a choice of what kind of content to make, and that's something that a bricklayer doesn't have. You know, he can't make Christian bricks. But when you're communicating ideas and truths and things like that in story, there is a higher obligation. It's not just, well, I just lay brick. So I do want, with my content, I follow the greats of the past, or I wish I was more like the greats of the past. I'm actually nothing like them, but guys like Virgil and guys like C.S. Lewis and guys like Tolkien and guys like Chesterton, people who are communicating great ideas through story. And I guess my biggest thing is I picture like maybe the most broken family in the world reading my stories, and I go, what would I say to them in story form? And so they're often stories of encouragement. You know, my heroes often go through a great ordeal. So it's made to give them hope and light, probably in a more generic sense than the faith, but I'm always talking about the faith, but it may not always come off that way in my stories. In a way, my stories are a fairy tale about my own faith and my own life, that there is hope, that if you're a terrible person or in a terrible situation, that's not the end of the story. That's never the end of the story. That's where my stories start.
Yeah, there's a lot of redemption in your stuff. Tommy Source Rex, Cardboard. Of course, I've talked to you about Cardboard every time I've talked to you because I love it so much.
I mean, at the end of Earthworm Jim, he's the meek will inherit the world. He's a stupid earthworm in an indestructible super suit. That's how I would describe all of us Christians, is idiot earthworms, moronic, given the power of a God in an impenetrable suit that is our faith. And he, you know, it's, I don't have to, I never spell that out to the audience or anything, because it's really, it's not, it's, my job is to tell it through story and not preach about it. My job, and so aside from being a comic artist, I'm not obligated to preach with my comic, because the Bible doesn't say go and make disciples with your bricklaying and with your writing. It says go and make disciples with your mouth and with your words. So I do have an obligation to share the gospel with my life, my work life. My job is to make great comics.
And I do think that sometimes, and we talked about this on the last time I did this theme. I think there's a real habit in Christian media to put the message before the quality of the medium. And so you're like, oh, it's okay that the movie's kind of terrible. It talks about Jesus.
Yeah,
that's really a horrible attitude to have. Tim Lim brought up the idea that, you know, that when they built the cathedrals in Europe, because he spent a couple of years in Europe and did some touring over there, and he was just blown away by these massive cathedrals and how much heart and soul and blood and tears went into building these edifices to say our God's pretty awesome. And if we have that, but when we go to make art today in America, the freest, richest, most prosperous nation in history, the beneficiary of the greatest cultures of the world, and we make a movie or a comic that sucks, and we just say, "Oh, it's okay because it talked about Jesus." I mean,
I think there's good examples out there too, though. There's you know, The Passion of the Christ is a great film and a great explicit message. Virgil is great. The Hallelujah Chorus is a great piece of music and very preachy. I think the Action Bible is a great book. So I'm just saying I'm not for removing message. Because the medium of comics can handle preaching also. I'm only saying my job specifically is to make a case to incredibly secular people, is where my heart is to put a little stone in their shoe. That's not everyone's job. That's my job.
Well, I think my bigger point wasn't that we shouldn't have message. It's that I don't think we should sacrifice quality, you know, whatever that means.
I mean,
and I'm talking to somebody who does a crappy little web comic, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have ventured over to forcesofgoodandevil.net, but it's not the greatest thing in the world. Art wise anyway. I mean, the art's better now than when we started it, because we have better artists working on it than me.
There's no reason a preacher shouldn't be working on his delivery all the time. There's no reason a Christian artist shouldn't be working on his skill as an artist and a writer. Just getting the message right often isn't enough. It's fine if you want to make a crappy web comic that has the message but crummy art and crummy writing. A lot worse has been done. Certainly for Satan, worse has been done.
That's true. I think the writing is not crappy. Okay, never mind. Not about me. From the chat, Twitless, who does his own webcomic, which is quite good, says, ask Doug if Professor Monkey for a Head is an analogy for Darwinism.
It never, when I created him, it never occurred to me at the time, but you know, probably about 15 minutes after I created him, I did think it was funny. It made a great anti-Darwin joke, which I'm all about.
So, Luke, you dropped out for a little while.
Yeah.
How do you feel like your Christianity, your faith affects your art?
You know, it's really difficult being a pastor and a comic book artist, comic book creator, because a lot of people think that, you know, my stuff should be very preachy, you know, and that it should be a certain thing. But I've never really liked Christian comic books or Christian media for that matter, because of the hokey factor. I mean, there's, you know, they just like Doug was saying, you literally sacrifice quality for the message, and I don't think that that's ever the case. I think some of the best, I think the best music should be faith-filled music. I think that some of the best musicians, artists, writers, all that kind of stuff, it should come from the faith. So when I write a book, or like when I'm drawing a book, I do it from a Christian worldview, but I don't do it. I don't really do it to be a Christian message. I do it to inspire conversations around faith. I try to represent Christians in a positive light so that people can see that, like, it's not, media tries to portray Christians in a certain way. And so I do my best to show, like, look, this is what a real person goes through that's in the faith. Like, just because they have faith doesn't mean they're, that there's no hard times, that they don't suffer, that maybe, not all of them is saved all at once. We go back to that first conversation that, nobody is more saved than the other. Once you're as saved as Billy Graham ever was, And
right.
so we kind of have those kind of conversations, and we deal with kind of some of those things. And it really comes
We're
down
not going to
the
ever
audience.
accidentally make an apologetic for atheism in our comics. I'm only saying we're not approaching it neutral. We do
Exactly,
have a
yeah.
bias.
Yeah, so there's definitely the Christian worldview in that. Definitely not doing it definitely not doing like, but yeah, for the most part, that's how I.
Well, and I think you really came on nailed something there. The idea that a lot of Christian media has everything has the happy ending because we have a worldview built on hope, right?
Yeah,
Right.
And so I think it's an easy trick to say, well, everything works out great. But like one of the great examples in comics that I that's very on the nose, but I think doesn't fall into that category of being cheesy is we were talking about Doug Ernst's Soul Finder.
Yeah.
Where
That's a
Father
fun
Redder,
book.
it's a great book, and the art, Tim just my goodness, he just hit it hard. It's so good. But it's so honest, and it's brutal, and it's painful, and everybody in it goes through real, genuine hardship, but it doesn't cut.
Yeah, there aren't easy answers in it, and I
no.
kind of like that. There wasn't an easy answer in it.
Yeah, all there is is faith is the end of it. Is knowing that the higher power that is our God is a higher power, and the importance of that. So
I do want to one day do my testimony in graphic novel form. I think it would be appropriate to do my testimony and have it be a full-blown fairy tale with weird characters, but just it's like I'm going to document my Christian journey in comic book form.
So, Luke, what is your comic about? Do you have one comic? Do you have several comics? What's your...
I'm working on 2 right now. So I have my main title that is I write and I draw called Hybrids, the Sons of Gods. And basically what it is, it's a takeoff of Genesis chapter 6, where it talks about the sons of God coming in and seeing the daughters of men.
Yep.
And, that kind of predates the Greek gods by about 1,500 years. And people that are way smarter than I am say that they believe that the Nephilim actually inspired the stories of the Greek gods. And so the theory is that, what if, if the Nephilim existed because of angel humans, and then they presumably would continue to procreate, and over the different generations, this Nephilim DNA would water down, it would and then some kind become so thin that it just like lied in you as a dormant trait. And so we explore the idea of what if something would happen and that trait would come alive. So instead of like a recessive trait with blue eyes or red hair, you would have a recessive trait that if it came alive, you'd have the ability to lift buildings or control things with your mind and things like that. And so we explore that, but it really bases around this human trafficking ring. So basically people are starting to come up with these powers like the Greek gods seemingly overnight, but just as soon as these people develop these powers, the people start to vanish. And so we follow this group of guys. A few of them are just normal. They're not super powered in any way, but they are basically they had some loved ones that were abducted. And so they are trying to find out who took them, where they took them, why they took them, those 3 things. And during that journey, you get to learn a little bit more about who they are. You get to learn a little bit more about their thoughts and their beliefs. And not every ending has a happy ending. I typically don't write happy endings. I write realistic endings. And so you have some wins and you have some losses. And the first 5 issues of Hybrids is exactly that. You have some wins and some losses in there. So
Cool.
That's kind of what I do. And then the other one,
pitch.
How long
Good
have you
pitch.
been writing it?
Thank you. It's fun. And then the other book I'm working on is called Voodoo Nations. It's about Travis Gibb actually writes it, and I'm drawing it. And
Okay.
I'm actually drawing it right now. It's actually about a missionary couple that go to Brazil and wind up getting manipulated into the world of voodoo and magic by a very, very, very evil guy. And so again, that's going to be a story that talks about faith and redemption, the loss of faith. At the beginning of the first book. Right in the first 5 pages, it talks about how the main missionary is talking about how she lost her faith, how she denounced faith. But it's about that journey back. And we're still working on the ending. And Travis is like, I don't know that I'm going to give this a happy ending. And I'm like, I'm okay if you don't, because not everything works out, you know? And so, but it's going to be a lot of fun to do that too. So those are the 2 projects I'm working on.
No, that's actually a really interesting take on it. Especially like the Nephilim, the sons of God thing.
Yeah.
We actually, within our deep lore of our comic universe, because like our webcomic is just one part of our ongoing universe. We've done some print, some web, some digital, all kinds of stuff. And so we actually have a similar little tick in there. So that's fun it's fun to see other people playing with that same idea. So
yeah, I always tell people it's 23andMe meets Taken. It's the Book of Enoch meets.
That's fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In ours,
set of skills.
In our universe, one of the ideas that we have is the idea that superpowers are native to the human genome, and they just left.
Yeah.
And so there's angelic and demonic DNA in the mix for some, but there's also just like ideal humans that emerge. And so we have a history going back to the Golden Age, and when the heroes started emerging in America, because we mirrored it with American comics. And so our premise is that miscegenation and the coming together of Americans from across of people from across the world to become Americans is what sparked the connection of the genetic type again. So that they were latent because we were all tribalized, and we got untribalized becoming Americans, and all of a sudden Americans are developing superpowers. So it's pretty cool.
I
maybe
wanted
a little political, maybe a little.
I wanted to do superpowers, but I didn't want
Just
to
a
do
smidge.
typical superheroes. You know, I didn't want to go into the same lore. You know, no magic hammers, no parents shot in the alley. I wanted to really I wanted to look at something and be able to when
It's kind of been covered.
It really has. And
I was going to say, are those a thing? I've never heard stories with those.
I really wanted to be at the con and say, look, you could be walking around with this DNA right now, and you could have superpowers, because I wanted it to be like that connection. And so the characters, I try not to do a whole lot of tights, and I know I never do a cape because I don't like the design, but we do some leotards and stuff like that. But mostly it's because that's the efficient thing to do. But most of the costumes are kind of basic stuff, and
Because they're all yoga instructors. That's
pretty much. Like, well, this is like this right here. This is some of the pictures.
Oh, that's really good
so
looking. That's cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we work with. So and it's really cool because over the 5 issues, I started 4 or 5 years ago with this book, and so I've really improved a lot from issue 1 to issue 5. So you kind of get to follow the journey. It was also my first book I ever wrote, and then and so I've written a whole lot more since I've hit issue 5, and so it's been pretty fun journey. But it's I like it, but I'm biased. Heck, I wrote it.
How long have you been writing that particular series? Like from issue 1 to 5, like what's the time span that you've been doing that?
Oh, well, I started working on the concept about 10 years ago. I was having a conversation with a pastor, and we talked about that and how that ties into the Greek gods, and how that ties into ancient aliens, and the aliens really aren't outer space, they're here, and all that kind of stuff. And so he was like, he knew I liked.
Are they illegal aliens?
No, they're not, well, no.
No, I'm just
I'm sure.
They're certainly undocumented. Yeah, some of them.
Just statistically, they'd have to be some, right?
They would, yeah. Some of them are, yes. But so I started that in the kind of development, and when I pitched it, I wasn't expecting that I would do much with it, and so I was actually working on another book at the time called Worst Day Ever. It was a zombie rom-com, and so about a guy who actually works as a sign boy dressed as a hot dog during the zombie apocalypse, and so it's kind of funny. That's hilarious. I like it. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's amazing.
But we needed a superhero book on the little imprint that I was running, and so everyone was like, "Hey, do that Nephilim book that you got." And so I just wrote a script, did the book, didn't expect it to take off, and then people liked it, and so I wrote a second one and drew it, and then that company closed, and another company picked it up, and then I just took over from there. So it's really been about 5 years in between all that mess of, who's publishing, where's it going kind of thing, that I've been working on that.
So is that a thing where you're doing you're are part of a company and an imprint and all kind of stuff, or how does that work out?
Well, I actually was the project manager for a company called Starcross until just about 4 hours ago. So I just stepped away from that, and I said, amicably, not in a bad way. It's just one of those things where a lot of those guys are serious hobbyists with comics, and it's time for me to. I'm full time with the church right now, and my goal is within the next year and a half to be able to not have to take a salary and do like Paul said. You saw that we worked hard to make our own way to provide for, so that we're not a burden on you. And so I don't want to be a burden on the church people I do ministry with. So I'm looking at trying to use art to monetize that. And so I've had a pretty successful few months, and it's one of those moments where it's like, it's poo or get off the pot kind of scenario. It's either stay serious hobbyist or take it into the next level. And so as I've been talking with them, it's like, it's time to take it to the next level. And that means I'm gonna have to take some pretty big, scary moves. And not everyone on that company is ready to kind of do those things. And so it doesn't make sense to kind of sit there. So I'm kind of partnering with might be partnering with some other people. I don't know. I'm praying about it for a few days, weeks, and see where God leads. But one step at a time, it was time to step away. So until then, I was working with this group, this conglomerate, where we were kind of sharing some IP and different things like that. And
I've seen the branding and stuff.
Yeah. So it's I'm gonna still continue to work with them unless I get it with a publisher where I can't do that. But if I wind up starting an imprint or working with another imprint that will allow me to, I'm still gonna do crossover stuff with them and do some connected stories, because it's so fun to write stories with these guys. They're so creative and so energetic about it, and it all ties in so well with everything. And so I just there are going to be future collaborations, but for the most part, it's just been something that's been eating in my brain for a long time. And I wanted to tell, there's really one story that I want to tell with the whole arc, but quite honestly, no one would care if I told that story. So I have to tell two other stories in order for people to care about that story. And so, you know how that is, so there's
You got to have the right setup going into it.
Yeah. So
that's what I was going to ask. Is it a setup thing? I'm not really a writer, man. I do some journalistic work here and there for college, but that's about it. But is that a part of it, is where you would need to set that story up for people to care about it, where it's like, if I just gave them the story I want to tell, you don't know the context behind it.
That's absolutely, it's absolutely true. Because the story I want to tell, if they don't know the characters, they won't care about the characters, and then they also won't see the allegorical connection to what I'm trying to teach, like what I'm trying to show in that story. And so, the only reason why we care that Frodo is the Christ characters, because we care about Frodo. The only reason that we care about, Gandalf being, going through the water and the fire and becoming not Gandalf the Grey, but Gandalf the White, is because we care about Gandalf, and so, in that kind of storytelling, which is what I like to do, you've got to set it up, and you've got to give the reader time to experience the characters, and that's what I'm trying to do. Not as masterfully as some people, but I'm getting better at it, and I'm starting grabbing the team that I need to do it. But this first arc, we just finished up the first 5 issues, and so it has gotten quite a bit of recognition from some mild circles. People that like me say that it's good. So
your first arc is the first 5 issues.
Yeah.
Just so I'm understanding that right. And then your next arc will be the next 5 or 6 issues, and then you'll get to the arc that you actually want to do.
The next arc will be 4. So it starts out with Trash Day as the first arc, and then it goes to Love Lost, which is the next one that sets up the story that I really want to tell, which is the Necromancer. So looking forward to it. I'm like, I just got to get these other stories done so I can get there, but I want to take time with it, take care of it. So that it really matters when they read that third arc, that third and final chapter that I have.
What's your page? Like, how often can you do a page? How long does it take you to do one page?
I can knock 1 or 2 pages out a day. If I don't have a lot of other stuff going on with church, or if I'm not lettering or coloring anything, I can do about 9 pages a week.
Very good. Wow. That's a good pace.
That is good.
Yeah, I got a lot of the same struggles. I got a lot of same struggles because I've got stories that I really want to tell with my Dinosaur Man character, but I've got to get the audience to a certain point in order for those things to make sense.
Yeah.
So definitely know. I know how that goes.
Yeah.
So so Eric, tell us a little about how your well, first of all about your comics, but also about how you feel like your faith impacts those. What's your perspective?
Well, right now I'm working on finishing up the Roddy Piper Kilted Avenger comic book. I got about 5 pages left of that, and I didn't write it, but it's him as a vigilante superhero. It's a lot of fun. Can't wait for that. My IP though, Dreaded Dinosaur Man, is about a character in a completely different universe who doesn't remember who he is, but he has the head of a dinosaur, a head of a monster. And so his hero's journey, his struggle is allegorical to our struggle with sin, struggle with feeling like a monster. Sometimes he doesn't know whether he's the monster or a man. These are the types of conflicts that he has constantly. We start the story with him just deciding that he's going to be a hero. He's going to make what's right. And he's got stuff in his past that I want to tell that he's really ashamed of, that he wants to kind of atone for those things. And then his hero's journey will eventually lead him to a choice whether or not he finds out who he is, if he wants to keep that knowledge, and some larger, bigger battles and sequences there. As far as my faith goes, I definitely echo what Doug said about, if you're a bricklayer, you do the best job you can of laying bricks for God. You don't phone it in, as you try to minimize doing that at all. And creating those relationships with the art that I do, and trying to start conversations. And what I hope to do with Dinosaur Man is bringing him on this journey. And there's a lot of Christian allegory in it, but it's got to fit the story. I don't want to backpedal my story to try to fit something in. I want it to come out naturally and flow. And that's one of the things I think, a lot of us who are doing comics reject about the mainstream now, as they've switched over to the idea of here's their pamphlet that they want you to believe, and they're just going to cram whatever characters to sell you to it. I want to do the complete opposite. I want to create something beautiful, something that'll last, and something that will have those deeper moral lessons, kind of like, there's a lot of 80s reference to it, because that's when I was a kid, the G.I. Joes, where they would have the lesson at the end of the episode. The Optimus Prime character, who was constantly saying that all sentient beings are worthy and deserve to live and deserve freedom. So there's a lot of those.
Freedom is the right of all sentient beings.
Yeah, freedom is the right of all sentient beings. So there's a lot of those types of themes that I address with my comic, and then I want to kind of bring it around to there's no because a lot of sci-fi kind of brings in the evolution thing as just a given, where in my universe, the belief in a creator is there. They don't have a personal relationship with this creator. It's kind of they're more removed from it. There's elements of societies on these different planets that have decided to give up on it entirely. He doesn't even know if he believes it or not, because he still has amnesia, doesn't even know who he is. So we're going to be learning about the particular creation beliefs in this culture with him. And there's, of course, allegory to my own faith-based walk. But ultimately, it's that struggle with sin, struggle with being a monster, and choosing, because we as Christians, we have to choose to not do that sin, to be better than we are. And Christ's salvation, God's grace, equips us to make those decisions. Whereas a sinner, they're just at the mercy of their emotions and their carnal being. We have that equipping, and so hopefully that will come out in the story where he's being equipped as the story progresses down the line.
Cool. That actually sounds like really fun.
Oh yeah.
I love complex allegory, and that's one of the things. Like it's one of the. I suppose it's probably funny, because you look at like Tolkien talked about hating allegory, but there's very clear parallels in his work to very specifically Catholic dogma, so he didn't get away from it, but it's multiple shades of it. It's not a one-to-one thing, and I think that that is a I think that makes it really good. I have
His
this
stuff
theory.
was actually very allegorical. It just wasn't. I think he hated thin allegory and bad allegory.
Yeah.
When it's not, he's talking about, because he and Lewis wrote a little bit about this, that modernism would ruin the fairy tale. Like they were more upset that like the atmosphere and a little more of a tension between the meaning and the story that, you know, that was always so huge and vast in fairy tale, that was getting narrowed by modernism, like one for one. Like he would probably be very much against what George Orwell was doing, I would say.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that like when I look at what I try to do with my writing is that I think that all stories are metaphor for the experience of our lives. And so when it comes to fairy tales, you know, saving the princess isn't really about saving the princess. I
That's
think
right.
The saving the princess story is about teaching young men to be good husbands. Make that an aspiration. I want to save the princess. I want to take care of the wife. I want to slay the dragon. I want to go out there and, you know, break my back for bread for my family. And I think that
we can't have that in today's society.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's because we don't tell. I think part of why we don't is we don't tell fairy tales the same way. And even our superhero stories, which I think are the modern fairy tales, the modern myths, we've watered them away from those roots with our postmodern thinking and all of the Watchmen and all of its bad clones.
Tolkien didn't mean that there would be no meaning transcribed in story. And he certainly wasn't talking about Narnia when he made that comment. I think he just didn't want it to be a real clunky one for one. This is this and that is that.
Yeah.
And if we're really reflecting, because like if art is to reflect society back to itself, right? Our lives are complicated, and we can't just expect like the Aesop's fables version of our thinking, right? Aesop fables are simple because they're for 4-year-olds,
right?
And so they're good and it's good encoded meaning, but there's more to it than that. And so as we progress out and even look at the layers of complexity between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, I mean, those are intentionally coded with different sorts of information because they're intended for different audiences, progressive. And so what we've tried to do with our universe and our little webcomic, we've been Forces of Good and Evil. We've been doing a publishing online since 2006, and it's the story of superheroes, with their high school kids in superhero and supervillain high school, and so the kids in villain school are being taught to be villains, and the kids in hero school are being taught to be heroes. And one of the big questions that we focus around is, what does that even mean? Well, our two main characters are best friends before they were sent to different schools, and so they meet new friends at their other schools, and it begs this question about what is heroism and what is villainy and what does free will have to do with all of this, and in the context of these silly, like Saved by the Bell type of comedy situations. It's moving towards
there.
It's been a long time since I've heard that reference.
Who's your Screech character?
Yeah.
Where's AC Slater?
Yeah, it's not a direct parallel to Saved by the Bell. It's just silly high school hijinks.
But it would be cool if it was.
But it's not. So it's not cool.
It would not be not be cool.
Yeah. So, but anyway, and so with it's we're trying to tell stories that are silly and fun with just enough drama and teenage angst to kind of drive home the questions about these questions about meaning that teenagers go through without maybe not even thinking about it. And that's actually to set up the next stage in some of these characters' lives. Because when we're done with high school, it takes place during the junior and senior year of two of our students. And when they graduate high school, that comic's done, but they have more adventures, and it's part of a larger world that is asking the questions about what is heroism and what is truth, that are all part of that. And it's a really, really big story that I don't know that I will live long enough to tell, because I'm already 42 and we're still in the second year of stories. So, but yeah, so that's part of the thing. As far as where I take my faith in it, is that I don't want to be super on the nose with it because I want these people's lives to be lived in. And so it's not about proselytizing, it's about thinking. And so like some of the characters have a definite faith aspect to them, and some of them don't. One of our side characters is a character called Demon Priest, whose father is an Episcopal minister and his mother is a demon. And so he's in villain school because obviously he's a villain, but he's in conflict over his eternal soul. He doesn't even know if he has an eternal soul or if redemption's possible, but that's all under the surface in his life. Is nothing he'll admit to his friends because that's not cool to talk about. And so those are some of the kinds of things that questions that are underpinning some of our silliness. And I'm not sure if I pull it off or not, but that's what we try to go for. Is to ask questions about the real world by asking questions about a fake world. So
that's good. And Mark, what do you read since you're here as a reader?
Right now, really, I've been reading mostly indie stuff. I haven't been really reading a lot of the big two for the past few years.
I've hardly ever read the big two. I've always gone indie.
Yeah, for I think the obvious reasons. I think I don't necessarily need to drudge up all that stuff, but there was a lot with the mainstream comics that I started to take issue with, and it pushed me to more indie stuff. But I always liked Captain America, the Avengers. Green Lantern, especially. I tell people all the time my favorite thing to ever come out of DC Comics is Jeff Johns and EVS's Green Lantern run. And I haven't even read the whole thing. I've read both chunks of it, but that's easily my favorite thing to ever, especially the Sinestro Corps War and the Blackest Night. I love that stuff. Sinestro, for me personally, is one of the best characters ever written in comics. I love that character. He's someone who doesn't, I always find villains the most interesting, the ones who don't believe themselves to be bad guys. Like Doctor Doom doesn't see himself as a bad guy, for him, like all the bad stuff he does is like, well, it's out of necessity for the sake of his country. And, he's so egomaniacal. He thinks that the only way to really save the world if he pretty much has all the power, then he can keep the world safe. He doesn't see himself as a bad guy. But I always like characters like that. I always like Captain America. Captain America is my all-time favorite superhero. And he wasn't growing up. I went through phases as a kid. I loved Spider-Man. As a teenager with a lot of anger issues, I loved the Incredible Hulk. And when I became an adult and I was about 19, 20 years old, Captain America was really everything I could want to be as a man. I found in Captain America. The guy's noble, integrity, patriotic. His moral compass is rarely, if ever, wrong. And he was grounded. You know what I mean? I always loved that, the man out of time aspect. He was just a really great character, and I like him even more than, I know Superman is like the granddaddy of all superheroes, but I actually like Captain America more than Superman. If you told me to choose between the two of them, I'll always take Captain America over Superman.
I actually would have
like no, go ahead.
I was going to say I would have had the same opinion up until they introduced John Kent, which was, of course, a short-lived time. But seeing Superman make that migration to fatherhood, I thought was such a solid move. And then Bendis ruined it. But
you took the words out of my mouth. You took the words right out of my mouth.
It was an amazing story.
It's no coincidence that our fondness for a lot of these characters always anchors back to when they were still rooted in their messianic Judeo roots of creation. Like Superman was a straight up Jewish messianic character, all born out of people who survived the Holocaust.
It's the Moses story.
Yeah.
They're being written now by a different culture.
Yeah.
Is what's happening.
So that's
We've moved
going to
on.
sound messed up, but it's unfortunate for the character. And I think that it's unfortunate. Like Captain America effectively being turned into a Nazi
Yeah.
that's crazy to me. I that to me was insane, almost sacrilege.
Yeah.
You know,
I absolutely felt it was sacrilegious. I mean,
Well, if you look at the
and
worldview of even Hollywood movies and stuff, what can they call
Mhm.
good and evil anymore? They're too afraid because they know as soon as they say this is good or that's evil in the Judeo-Christian sense, they're working against their worldview, their politics, and their philosophy. That's all gone out of fashion. One dad, one mom can't be championed. The nuclear family can't be championed. Even truth, justice, and the American way, or loving your country.
Superman denouncing his American citizenship.
Right.
We've had that happen. Like, I don't understand it from a fan perspective. You know,
they want a
I don't
different.
understand.
They're teaching their fans something different.
Well, and that's I think part of it is that there's been a disconnect, and this is something that I had somebody approach me today about doing a show next month about having is when did comics stop? You know, when did comics culture start being such a mean girls club? And I think we're probably I'm going to try to gather up some of my historian pals and hammer that out next month.
And to that end, Matt, is there anything going on in comics, this particular kind of meanness that we're going through and watching now? Is there anything unique about that isn't going on in all other culture?
No,
because I hear people say like, can you believe how, Twitter blew up and everyone's hating each other? I'm going, oh, comics. That's happening here too.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
It seems unique to us because that's what we're buried in, but it's just, everyone's just acting the same.
I think you're 100% right. And I think, that Minneapolis is great proof of that.
Yeah.
That we're in a situation where we see it here, those of us who are involved in comics Twitter to our detriment. We see it because that's where we're at. And I know, like, when I started on Twitter a couple years ago, and I always swore I'd avoid it. But some of my webcomic pals from way back in the day, the only place they were online was on Twitter. And I was like, I want to talk to so-and-so, so I'm going to get on Twitter so I can talk to so-and-so because I want to swap ideas with this person I knew like in 2008. And I'm glad that I did that, but I decided when I came over, I was like, well, I'm very political. I talk about politics and the philosophy of politics on my Facebook all the time. I don't want to do that on two platforms. So I'm going to leave all of that partisan stuff on Facebook. And wouldn't you know, the first thing that happens is people arguing about politics incessantly but they're not talking about politics because it's about comics. You don't know what politics are. So I've spent 2 years telling people what politics is. And
I don't argue politics on Facebook at all. I save it all for Twitter is my complete dumping ground. It is my sewer.
Dumpster fire.
I've noticed.
Yeah, exactly. I put my worst
bro.
thoughts on Twitter. I don't ever put that stuff on Facebook. Is my business and my family's on there. And
well, I think that's part of the problem. Social media in general. I have conversations. I'm like a social media professor, and I'm considering getting a master's in social media, not because I like social media, but because I hate it, and I understand that is really the future of the professional communications industry. That's where I got my degree in, and so I want to be marketable. But social media is, without question, dividing our nation into two distinctive tribes. And if you're anyone who does not believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah.
And it's become very, very ugly, and it's strange to me because I even have relatives that we could have had a political disagreement before, and we would have been fine. But now it's like really nasty and it's really bad. And I don't know. A lot of people, to me, are very sheepish, and they don't necessarily think things through before they post something, or they have a very off the cuff reaction and that's their opinion on whatever. Pick something, I don't care. It's kind of arbitrary to what I'm talking about. But I see this stuff, and people like on Facebook, for example, I have actually used and posted on my Facebook maybe 15 times in the past 2 years.
Yeah, me too.
Because I don't use it. I don't barely even look at it. The only time I've even started using it in the past couple of months is because I had to run the Facebook for my school's newspaper. But I felt so much better not using it. I use Twitter a little bit more, but I don't actually tweet a lot. I read stuff, and some of the stuff I read, I'm just like,
I think we used to have a barrier.
What
We used to have a
is wrong with
barrier
some
of
of you?
manners and respect. We had this barrier with
and I
people
think-
who we supremely disagreed with, just as much as we've always disagreed. But we had a bit of a respect for the other person and a little more manners.
And I
That's
have
out
a
the window
suspicion.
now.
I have a suspicion that part of that is the impersonal nature of social media.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Another part of it has to do with the fact that I don't think as a culture that we're teaching thinking.
No.
And so everything is an emotion. Almost everything is this guttural, visceral, emotional reaction. And you can't, and so everybody, like, you move from that place of just like passively reading to anger, and then there's no more thinking, there's no more talking, there's no more reasoning, and the other side of that too is then when you're for me anyway, when I am trying to have real conversations with people, especially on Twitter, like their reaction will be, oh, you're just mad, you're mad, or you're jealous. And I'm like, I'm bored. I have been bored this entire time. I'm not angry. I just want you to actually make a point. And I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm only saying you haven't made a point.
I'm just very intrigued by this idea that you're having conversations on Twitter. I've been on Twitter, and there's not a conversation to be had. It's
they're usually
people
bullet
screaming
points.
Yes, bullet points and people screaming in echo chambers.
It's a meme war. Twitter's just there for meme war.
Twitter is a cesspool of negativity, and I try to stay off of it as much as I can. I go in to promote my comic book and talk with a few people, and I just to make sure that everything is still in order. So and so hates somebody, and then here's some more dildo pics and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous.
I've straight up told people on social media before, I'm not a particularly hot-headed guy. I'm not a violent guy, but I've straight up told people on Twitter before, like, I have a funny feeling that if I was in front of you, you wouldn't have that same type of energy that you have now when you're tweeting at me.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not a tough guy. I'm not intimidating. At least I don't think so. But I promise you, you would not have that same level of energy you got right now that you're tweeting at me. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Well, one great development might be that Twitter will become, instead of text-based, video-based. And then we'll lay down our tweets with just messages to other people when we have to face other people, live. Maybe that'll be a development that'll help.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the problem too, is that in text messaging, and I think I might have told Rhys this last week when we spoke. I had a lady friend who would text me, and I would call and then be like, I'm mad at you. Why are you texting me? Text me back. And I said, because that's not a conversation. That's, like I said earlier, that's bullet points. There's so much in verbal communication that's lost in textual communication. Your tone, your dictation, all that stuff plays into how someone is going to interpret not only what you're saying to them, but how you're trying to come across to them. You can't really tell if someone's angry or not unless they're in all caps. And even then, they could be just messing around. You know what I'm saying?
So
but it's hard to interpret that.
90% of communication is nonverbal. So on social media, we're working with 10% of what we're capable of.
Yep.
Well, and here's one thing that I about the all caps thing, going back to the message board days. So back in the early 2000s, I was working on putting together scripts and trying to pitch them to DC and Marvel and the whole works, and collecting rejection letters, as we used to call it. And I'd get on the message boards to chat about something or other, and I'd have my caps lock left on from scripting. And somebody would be like, "Why are you yelling at me?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was just writing dialogue for a comic. I'm sorry."
Yeah. Hey, Matt, it's 10 o'clock. I got to go to bed. I'm old.
Yeah, it is definitely time. Guys, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really good show.
Yeah,
And
this has been
you guys-
wonderful. I really appreciate being included.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure.
Me too.
So,
Thank you.
Well,
like,
I love meeting you guys too. Let's do another one and pick another topic.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Doug,
So,
Eric, Luke, it was seriously a pleasure to have
So-
to be here
so
with
if
you
you guys
guys,
need to
Matt.
drop
I really appreciate it.
I'm going to do some closing announcements. So in the description, there is nothing because I didn't look up anybody's links ahead of time.
Uh-huh.
But I will go ahead and put stuff in there so that you guys who catch it on replay, and I'm looking at you, Tim Lim, can go ahead and follow people's links if they want to. And other than that, thank you guys so much for coming on. And this has been the Mattriarchy, and have a great night.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Well,
Right.
Thank you. Good night,
See you
guys.
guys.
It was an honor
God bless
and
you
a
guys.
privilege.
Yep.
God bless
Bye.
you.
Bless you.